Good evening, or whatever time it is where you are. My name is Starkovich Forster, and I am a worship pastor and music minister for many years now. Been doing music ministry full-time since 1992. Started playing in church at age 4 and became a full-time musician in my dad's church when I was 11 years old. And I've been doing this ever since. Through those years, just to give you a little background, I have worked in multiple churches around the country and even different sizes, from small churches to very large churches, what we would now call mega church sized churches. And I've served in all of those different capacities, also different denominational backgrounds and different cultural groups that I've worked with. And so in my years of working in so many various situations, I felt that I wanted to just share some of the lessons I've learned along the way, some concerns I see in today's music ministry scene that I think we should be talking about a little bit more seriously. I do want to give a disclaimer that as I go through this series on musicianship and church music ministry and balancing all of that, as we talk about this, I'm going to be sharing my philosophical approach and some of my views on things. These are my personal views. You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to change how you do things if you don't feel that you need to. You will hear other people with a different philosophy, and that's fine. That's one of the things I think that makes the body of Christ so wonderful, is we have so much diversity, and you can pretty much find the right scene for you. But I do want to share that I feel that I've learned some life lessons in this particular area through the years. In this first session, I'm going to give you a little bit of background of my own journey in music ministry. I'm going to talk about influences in my style of playing and my musicality, and I'm also going to share a little bit about just some historical approaches to how music has come about in my journey. I also, in this series, we're going to dive into not so much technique of how to play certain chords and things like that, but we will talk about creating moods, and we will talk about variation of the human emotional ranges that need to be addressed in any given service. We'll talk about themes of songs and choosing right songs for settings and things like that I feel sometimes has gotten lost in our recent years. We're going to talk about developing an actual music program for the development of artists and musicians and performance people in the church, and some of the concerns I've seen with the way we're doing it. I would say the most popular model today. I think it has some good sides to it as far as the quality, if you will, of what's being produced, but I think that we're paying a greater price on the other end of that I don't know if it's quite worth what we're having to pay. And I'll talk about that in some of the later videos. But as we dive into this, I've jotted down some things, but I wanted to first, like I said, just start with giving you a little bit of background about my journey. Like I said before, my name is Starkovich Forster. I was born and raised in Mississippi, Northeast Mississippi, the same town as Elvis, of Tupelo. Where I grew up in that little segment of the South, when I was growing up, born in 1971, the majority of the churches in our circles, first of all being African American, secondly being Pentecostal, were mostly guitar driven with what we would now call that quartet style. For you who are not from that part of the country or not familiar with different types of black gospel, think of B.B. King with his guitar, but singing about Jesus. And that was pretty much what everybody was doing around us. Unless you were in the Baptist churches, the African American Baptist Methodist churches, they were mostly doing hymns. They would do some traditional gospel songs, maybe something by James Cleveland or something of that nature. But they pretty much only had pianos in their churches. Now, my mother and grandmother, who were my first influencers in music, were musicians, choir directors in the African American Baptist Church, but my grandmother played for Methodist and Baptist churches as she played different Sundays at different churches. And she read music. She had taught herself how to read music, and then my mother picked up on that and was also in chorus in high school and developed a knack for directing and creating music as well. So in 1966, I'm going to use the word converted from the Baptist tradition over into a Pentecostal movement. The pastor through which they came into Pentecostalism was heavily influenced by the revival movement of that time. In 1950s and 60s, there was a big thing happening with the big tent meetings of the healing revivals from that time. And A.A. Allen was really popular. And so my mother and them were introduced to the music of A.A. Allen through their pastor. And so the earliest music when my mother and grandmother started the choir at the church, when they began the church, was pulling from their Baptist choir stuff and what was happening with Gene Martin and Nancy Harmon and the music that was coming out of the A.A. Allen camp. It included some James Cleveland and things like that. Now, our church did not have a Hammond organ. They had a Yamaha Electone 40, if I remember. It's either 30 or 40. And so it was not a Hammond, even though we did have the colored records, if you remember, the blue, red, orange, yellow, the records that came in different colors. A. Allen produced his albums mostly in those types of vinyl records. And so my mom had a collection of them. And we had David Davidson, who was the organist for A. Allen Revival. We had Nancy Harmon's albums from that time, from that 60s. So we're talking 67, 68, early on. And then my mother had traditional music, Mahalia Jackson and some of the groups like that. But as they were coming along, they were introduced quickly to Andre Crouch and then the Hawkins family. So our church, because of this broad influence, we were singing a lot of different music. Now, my earliest years of playing was very simple. I only played in E flat at first because that was the key that my mother did a lot of songs in. So you think of Jesus on the Main Line. It was a traditional song at the time. Jesus on the main line, tell him what you want. Oh, Jesus on the main line, tell him what you want. Jesus on the main line, tell him what you want. Call him up and tell him what you want. Now, I'm playing a little fancier than what my earliest years. I was playing something like that. So it was this mix of traditional piano playing on an organ. And that was because my mother had played piano and started playing the organ, so she played it kind of in that style. My grandmother was the same. But our pastor also liked what he calls spiritual songs. Spiritual songs for him were what we would now just consider the hymns. So he would, especially at communion, he would want to sing Oh, the Blood of Jesus and those types of songs. So, but we also were singing songs from the Gene Martin era, and there was a lot of six chords, which I did not know that's what that was called back then. We just heard it. But if you think packing up, getting ready to go, I am on my way to New Jerusalem, where the sun will never go down. Every day I'm making preparation, get ready to go, get ready to go. I'm packing up, getting ready to go, packing up, getting ready to go. So that was the kind of the music that was around us, but we also were singing "O Ship of Zion." "'Tis the old ship of Zion, O ship of Zion, O ship of Zion, O ship of Zion." And I was influenced by that, but we were also listening at home to everything that had to do with church music. My parents believed in us watching stuff about church. So if it was hee haw on Saturdays, towards the end of the program they would do gospel, which was usually a Southern gospel. Sunday mornings, gospel jubilee. It was actually called Jubilee, and it was Southern gospel quartet groups, and the Rambos and others of that time would come on and sing. And then after them was the Oris Mays show, which was out of Memphis, and their show featured choirs usually, or quartet groups from the black gospel scene. But Milton Brunson's choir, and so we were hearing songs like "Step in just when I need him, step in just when I need him, step in just when I need him, step just when I need him, step in just when I need him." So we were hearing that music as well. Plus we had Love Alive, with "Everywhere You Go There's Trouble for God Standing By" is the name of the song. "Going Up Yonder" and all those songs from Love Alive. And we were just inundated with a lot of different music. My mother also had this idea that our family, my brothers and my sister and I, all sang every Easter, Christmas program, Children's Day program. We were the Forster children, and she would find a song for us to sing. Most of the time, these group songs that she chose were what is now part of either the middle of the road inspirational music or CCM music, early CCM. So we're talking, for example, we did "Greater Is He That Is In Me," which is a Lanny Wolf song that we didn't know Lanny Wolf yet, even though he was in Mississippi. But we didn't know him, but we were singing, "Greater is He that is in me. Greater is He that is in me. Greater is He that is in me than he that is in the world." Now we got the song from "Expect a Miracle," which was Oral Roberts' show, and that was their song that they went off the air on every week. So again, when Oral Roberts was on Sunday mornings and that song would come on, my mother had us to record. She kept a cassette recorder in front of the TV every time these programs were on, so that if something came on that could possibly be a good choir song or a group song, we would hit record so that we would have these songs to go back and play them back and listen to them to learn them. And so these were the earliest years of my music. When I was 11 years old, my father became a pastor of a church. He was elected pastor of a church, and it was still in our town. But as we were starting their church, I started playing, and we had by now had a contemporary Christian radio station. It was not in syndication like they are now. Back then it was local, so our station played Southern gospel from, I want to say, 6 a.m. till about 10. And then at 10 o'clock, they would start playing the Maranatha, Hosanna, Integrity type praise and worship music. And then 1 o'clock, the Christian news and talk shows would come on. Then at 3 o'clock, they would play what they call the inspirational middle of the road music, which was Bill Gaither, Larnell Harris, Lanny Wolfe trio type music. And then at 6 o'clock in the evening, they would start playing their more contemporary Christian, which was the Amy Grant, Michael W. Smith, and that music. So we were getting on our Christian radio, we were learning this other music, Leon Patillo, Morris Chapman, and several different artists from that time. The Blackwood brothers, Blackwood and Andrus was really popular with us. We liked them. And then in 1983, my parents got the big satellite dish, which gave us access to even more music, because now we were able to watch all of these churches who were on satellite television at the time, TBN and National Christian Network out of Clearwater, Florida. And we would watch, we could turn the thing and it would turn, and we'd pick up all these church channels, as my mom called them back then, and we would watch Bishop Norman L. Wagner's church and just several people performing, singing. We had access to PTL. That's where we learned BB and CC Winans as they were starting out as PTL singers. So I started taking organ lessons. I'd already done piano lessons, but I started taking organ lessons from Judy Bradley, who had worked with my mother, and she quit working in the factory to start teaching private lessons. And they had the C3 at their church, so I started learning how to play the C3 organ through Judy Bradley. And the first song she taught me was the song I've Got the Holy Ghost Down in My Soul in the key of G. Down in my soul, just like the Bible said, I've got the Holy Ghost down in my soul, just like the Bible said. When I've been into the water and I've been baptized, my soul got happy and I'm satisfied. I'm ready to take my journey now, just like the Bible, just like the Bible, just like the Bible said. And that was my introduction officially to the UPC churches. She was in a United Pentecostal church, and we started going to their revivals, visiting their churches, going to things they were having at the park or whatever. We would go, our youth group would go, and then she told me about Lanny Wolfe, because she had to go to a conference called National Music Ministry Conference, which was at Jackson College of Ministries in Jackson, Mississippi. And she told me, you remember the song More Than Wonderful? And she named these songs that I had known, but did not know they were Lanny Wolfe. Did not know who he was. But we knew his music and had used his music in church. Just didn't know the source. As black churches, we weren't buying sheet music and things. We listened to it, lifted it by ear, and taught it. So she told me about Lanny Wolfe. She brought me materials from music conference and started teaching me how to read chord charts and things like that, along with me taking piano from her to learn my notated music. So by the following year, 1986 rolls around, and my parents decided that they were going to have us, my sister and I, go to senior camp with the United Pentecostal Church in Mississippi District. And the coolest thing happened, because Lanny Wolfe was our camp choir director. And it was wonderful because he opened it up for auditions on that Monday. On Monday, when he opened up for auditions, if you played in your church or you sang specials or anything like that, he wanted to hear you. Now, part of this was so he could see which people could sing specials in the night services, but also if there was someone who was possibly I would say, good enough or vocally strong enough to lead on a verse or something in some of the choir songs for the evenings. Well, the first day, my sister wanted to audition. And so she did I Go to the Rock. I played for her on the organ. Remember, I'm not that great at the Hammond organ at this time, but I played that for her. So Brother Wolf, as we called him, Brother Wolf said that he wanted her to sing on Tuesday night as one of the specials. And he said, but I'm going to play for you. So he played for her, and that was just a really amazing thing to hear him play the organ. Because at our camp, he didn't really play a lot. He had JCM, Jackson College students, who were there for camp, or they would come through and help him with the music. And they did most of the playing. So Demetra Carney, who's a pastor's wife in Tupelo now, married to Jay Carney, friends of mine that I met at that camp, we're still friends to this day. She was a pianist, and David Reaver, who is now pastoring in Baltimore, at the church that was my first full-time position. Before he was the pastor, I was there. And he was one of the organists. He was on our youth committee for the district at the time. And John Urshan was an amazing organist that I was just mesmerized at these people who played black gospel, but they also did the contemporary Christian thing, and they could play anything you asked them to play, and their authenticity of being able to get the chords correctly and all the things that I had not been exposed to yet. So after that year, each year we would go to camp, and Brother Wolf would allow me to play on songs with them, and I would play organ most of the time. But the first year, he talked to me about going to JCM. So after I graduated high school, I'm skipping some ahead. During my high school years, we also came in contact with now Bishop Robert Forts, and he was district elder at the time. He preached for my uncle in Nettleton, Mississippi, and we met him because he wanted someone who could back him up on the organ when he preached. And so my uncle called and asked my dad if we could come, our church would come, so that I could play. And I had never really, we didn't preach that style of preaching to back up the preacher like that. So that was all something that was not part of my anatomy of musicianship at the time. But I'd heard it, like I said, watching all the people on TV, we'd heard it, so I just did what I could with it. But through them, we were then introduced to Greater Bethlehem Temple and Bishop Philip Coleman. So when I went to JCM as a student, my parents and Bishop Coleman and Bishop Kraft, the president of the college, they made a little agreement. So I went to JCM during the week, but on the weekends I would go and stay at Bishop Coleman's home and work for his church as the assistant music director to Willie Earl Maxwell, who was their music minister. And the thing is, at Jackson, at the school, we had fewer organists than we did pianists. So a lot of times I was playing organ a lot more because I could play the organ, though I wasn't great at it, but I could play. And of course, being in school, you get better as you're learning all your theory and all the things that we were learning in school. But at Greater Bethlehem Temple at the church, Willie Earl played the organ, and he was just an amazing organist. So he had me play piano. So I was getting more practice on the piano at Greater Bethlehem Temple, but at JCM I was getting more practice on the organ, even though I was taking piano lessons and things which were required. But it was in that setting that I got to really, I'm going to use the word, hone in on being able to play both comfortably. And also the different styles of the two churches, because at JCM we were we were basically a white school with white church. We went to First Pentecostal Church, which was all white. And then you had Greater Bethlehem Temple, which was the all black church down the street that had a 200 voice choir and of course, at the church at FPC, First Pentecostal, they had a very large choir, but then we had the school choir. So we were doing a lot of music. I was getting exposed to all kinds of music during those years of studying in school that was going on outside of school, along with what I was learning. And then I moved to Maryland, and while in Baltimore, my first job was in Baltimore, Maryland, got introduced to the sound of what I called the East Coast. Hezekiah Walker was already, we knew him because at Great Bethlehem Temple we had done some of his stuff. But of course you moved to Baltimore, and he was part of Bible Way at the time, and Bible Way worldwide, Bishop Showell and them they were the oldest apostolic church in Baltimore, and Hezekiah Walker and them were in the same denomination, so he was often down in the Baltimore area. We also had Richard Smallwood in DC, working with Metropolitan Baptist and Bishop Brooks's church, Way of the Cross. And so all of a sudden I'm in this setting with all this East Coast music, which was very different. But it was awesome to be able to explore being a music minister. Now I'm choosing the songs that our choir is singing. I'm finding songs, I'm learning songs. Where we had Heaven 600, which was our radio station, and then we had Morgan State. They had their own gospel station that played on Sundays. And so you were getting all the latest things. Kirk Franklin was just coming out at this time. So being able to hone in on all those early years of as the gospel choir sound was changing, I was coming into music ministry full time at that same time. So it was a great time to grow in my musicality. Then we went to Tupelo, Mississippi, worked in a children's home. My wife and I did the music there. And then after that, we were in Florida and then on to Houston. And while in Houston, I was introduced to a whole nother thing. And that was, I ended up working in a church where we had a family of children who played stringed instruments. They played cello, violin, and viola. And a lady in the church who was a violinist, Jane Kimmis, was a violinist for the Houston Grand Opera. And she played in our church. So now everything that we were doing in our choir, I had to, for the first time, arrange some form of string arrangements to go with it so that they could play for our worship. So now we're doing Hillsong, we're doing praise and worship stuff from different genres. We were exploring some of the Messianic music of that time, Paul Wilbur, and then also doing the Black gospel stuff and doing some of Fred Hammond, but adding this ensemble, this string ensemble to that, along with the guitar and bass, and it was a whole different type of music that we were creating in that setting. And it was amazing to be able to also add Spanish culture, because we were in Texas, and while we were in Florida, we had met some folks and learned about how to incorporate Spanish and English. So we brought that element into the church, and that was so refreshing to me, to be stretching myself as a musician to move into different types of music, and then also teaching it to our church. When we left Houston and came to Wichita Falls, where I live now, where we are now, came into an Assembly of God church, and they were kind of more into the Brownsville revival. They had come through that season in their church, so that they were heavily influenced by that, and so that pushed me into a different type of challenge of how to bring what I brought to the table, but also stay within the I'm going to say the brand of who they were as a local church, and served there for 7 years. In the meantime, before that, I also worked in a Southern Baptist church that was a very large church, ran something 15,000 there at the Met. And I was a keyboardist for them. I was not over the music program, but I was a keyboardist there. And while I was there, got introduced to Tommy Walker's music and Paul Beloche, and so they were kind of moving into this contemporary worship, and I got to work alongside of them and learn some more of the, I'm going to say, precise production stuff. What I didn't know is when I got to First Assembly, we were going to be a church that was on television, on our local television station, which meant everything I learned at the Met about staging and putting things in place and where people stand and balancing the look of the stage and all of that came definitely into practice when I got to Wichita Falls and was editing and working with Pro Tools and post-production things to get our DVDs down to the station and cutting and pasting the services together. So that was a learning curve for me as well. I say all of that to give you, not to brag about my own learning and all that, but I want you to just know that I'm not just making things up. So when I talk about the plethora of music ministry, I am drawing from a lot of different experiences. One of the things that I hope during this time that we talk about things in music, that I will be able to demonstrate how to create different moods and styles. For example, we'll talk about this, and I may do this one from piano at some point as well. But let's take Amazing Grace. That's a traditional song that almost every church knows. And we're going to be in the key of F. So there's the Amazing Grace, which is very traditional African American. You get the idea. And then there's also the what I call the and then we can also take that and do something a little more what I call swing gospel, which is what you would probably hear more in a UPC type church. And of course, then there's the contemporary style that I typically hear. But each one of those styles create a different emotion. And so depending on how you want people to feel will determine how you put that together rhythmically. Chord structures create different moods. So we'll start exploring some of that along the journey as well, and how drawing from other genres, even outside of what is your normal practice, helps you to broaden your church music. These will be informal, these little sessions that I do. Like I said, this is just an introduction, but we won't, they'll be very informal. I'm not trying to do a big production thing and all that. I just want to have conversation and talk about just music ministry in general, and things that we can do to improve, and just resources we can look to as musicians, as singers, and people in the work of serving in the kingdom of God, especially if you're in leadership roles in this arena. And I hope that you will find this to be inspiring. If you have any particular questions along the way, I'm really not looking for people to give a lot of comments on what you disagree with me on, or any of that. That's not, I'm not trying to build debate and all that. I would like to leave the comments, if you would, to questions about my experience, or something that maybe a situation you've been in and you'd like to get my take on it. That I'm willing to do. But if you're just kind of going in and just saying things that, just to create debate, because we all come from different schools of thought and schools of church, and so we could go on and run that mountain and go around that mountain for 40 years and still not have a concluding sense of what is the right answer, since all of them would be right in their own sense of where churches are. So again, thank you for your time, and I hope that if you're not a music person, you'll get a little understanding about how the process of how we put things together to make a service even come together at some point. So again, thank you for your time, and I look forward to visiting with you on this site again. Have a good evening, and God bless you.